are not in a galaxy far, far away. It's just that you have two uber geeks that are both Star Wars fans. For those of you that recognize the background behind me, this is an X-wing, and I swapped it out for my regular jet fighter in honor of our very special guest today, Junius, who is also a big Star Wars fan and has a I don't know what planet that is.
Not sure about
Yeah,
the planet. I'm just more interested in the Darth Vader back there,
that's right.
being menacing as ever.
That's right, and we have established yesterday that you shall now formally be known as Darth Sorcerer.
Yes,
That's right.
that's the moniker I'm going by from now on.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So, welcome everybody, and I'm glad you're joining us. I'll tell you a little bit about my friend Junius here. So, Junius and we've known each other for probably what 4 or 5 years, something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
And I knew him in a previous life. He recently got a new job as the director of TA for all IT at a secret, undisclosed government facility location that I can't tell you. But he is essentially running TA for one of the major, most profitable divisions of this government contractor and has to deal with a lot of secret cleared candidates. In the past, Junius has been my go to person when I've had questions about exactly that. Now, I actually teach a class on cleared candidate sourcing, and Junius participated in that class and was like, "Oh yeah, I know all that stuff," and then started teaching me some more things. So just to show you how much more he knows about that space than I do, um, and that's given the fact that I've actually worked with all 16 clandestine organizations. So think about that. Now, Junius's challenge right now is basically to define what sourcing is. So I thought that was a really good topic to talk about. And basically obtain or like get credibility from management to establish a sourcing function. So since he started in this role, he was tasked to build a sourcing team. Started doing that in January. Now we're a couple months in, and I was gonna, just ask some questions and talk about basically the objective and the obstacles and the trials and tribulations that you face when you're starting a sourcing function from scratch. So, um, with that in mind, what has been your biggest hurdle that you have already overcome? So the biggest hurdle when you were tapped on the shoulder and somebody said build a sourcing team, and the first major wall you ran into was what?
Yeah, I'm trying to think through like if there was any wall. I, I was pretty fortunate that I had leadership that was pretty supportive of the idea and kind of had the same vision, and that was partly part of the reason why I was brought on was they knew that I had had previous success with launching a sourcing team.
Hmm.
And kind of managing that process as well as having had experience with full life cycle teams as well. So there was a lot of like I would say excitement about okay, we're going to do this, but my primary objective, the first thing that I wanted to do was identify well what does success look like.
Okay.
And I think that's super important, right? Like, I didn't want to set up a team to just go out and find people, but not be able to ever report on, okay, how do we know if we're doing a good job? How do we know if we're being impactful? So I would say probably the first goal that I had was to develop a reporting structure to be able to communicate to the business how this particular sourcing function leads to other areas that they're more historically knowledgeable about of oh this means success to us, right? Like when you think of talent acquisition, you're gonna hear about okay, how many starts do we have this month, how many hires do we have this, how many offers went out, those sort of
Mm,
things, right? Well, the sourcing team, they're focused on the top of the funnel, like
right.
really generating candidate pipelines that feed to the recruiters, right? But so what I wanted to do was say, okay, well, I'm not going to have sourcers tied to a higher goal or anything like that because they 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 don't really have full autonomy to impact that because at some point they hand off. And at that point, it's between the recruiter and the hiring manager to kind of convert those candidates. So my focus was developing the metrics the KPIs for the team to focus more on number of production, so number of submittals, and then also identify, okay, what does quality look like for us, right? So we developed a benchmark of, hey, here's how many of your submittals should convert from, being a submission to accepted by the recruiter, and then from accepted by the recruiter, here's how many of those submissions should be accepted by the hiring manager.
Okay.
Um,
Conversion rates.
yeah, conversion rates, right?
Okay.
And I think those are more things that are truly in the control of a sourcer, because they have control over how many people they submit, and they have control over the quality of the people that they submit, um, by determining whether or not they are a good fit for roles. So, but I do tie sourcers to offers, meaning I don't hold them, say, hey, you need to have this many offers, but I do report on how many offers um, they are responsible for, so that way for other business leaders who maybe don't necessarily understand all the the details about what goes on in talent acquisition, they can see like, oh, okay, so we have these people and they were responsible for identifying these individuals as a source of hire. And so that's
Okay.
usually so that was one of the methods that I was pretty intentional about when I created the sourcing team, was developing, hey, how are we going to evaluate the team and show that they are being successful?
Right. So what kind of conversion rates are considered quality, and what is the peak measure, right? So like when I talk about metrics and measurements, and a lot of folks may already know this, but I actually for many years sat on the American National Standards Institute's delegation to the International Standards Organization, ISO, and we created we revised. It was already created, but it was out of date. We revised the recruiting standard and the recruiting metrics, and also started working on a sourcing standard. So, speaking from someone that has been around lots of other, international leaders in this area, one thing that I learned that was a big lesson for me was you gotta boil it down to like something, one or two or three things that you can really measure consistently.
Hmm.
So you can have 10 measurements. Like, you're the boss, you have your team, right? You're leading your team. You can have 20 measurements, you can have 100 measurements, measure whatever you want. But when it comes to metrics and reporting metrics and dashboards and scorecards, it's a good idea to have like a key metric or a couple of key metrics.
Yeah.
Have you identified that yet? Or is that like you're still measuring, so you haven't
Yeah, we're
gotten
still
there?
kind of kind of filling it all out, because like I said, I mean, there really was no sourcing function at the organization I was with like this before, right? So the first metric that we identified was, hey, well, let's create a submission goal, all right? So yeah, so we can at least get some cadence as far as, okay, weekly production to develop pipelines, and then from there, that's when we talked about the conversion rates. But as far as like, we don't, right now we're just in the process of trying to gather enough data to be able to say, okay, what are the historical trends? And so that's something I was planning on looking at over probably about the 3 month time, to be able to kind of see, okay, here, let's take a look at all of the production and in the areas that we've been successful in, and let's start to like peel that back a little bit to identify, okay, what are the appropriate benchmarks, like what truly makes sense, right? So at first, to get started, I just kind of had to kind of develop what I thought was some fair assumptions, which is, set like, hey, for every submission that the team submits to, that every sourcer submits to, a recruiter, we want, if you submit four, we want three of those to be accepted. So 75% acceptance rate. And for every four submissions that the recruiter sends to the hiring manager, we want the hiring manager to accept three out of four. Now, whether that will stay the same,
Hmm.
um, you know, that's up for debate, but it's a good starting point. that I thought was fair. It's not, too high off the deep end where we're saying you got to have 99% conversion rate or something, ridiculous like that. But I think it's reasonable to say, hey, if you send 4 people over, if you're really aligning them to the role,
Mhm.
you 3 of them should be accepted by the recruiter. I think that's fair.
Yeah, I agree with
Um,
that.
yeah,
That's actually about right in my
yeah,
opinion as well. Because if you approach 100% acceptance rate, in other words, if a sorcerer is sending 10 submittals or ten profiles of people that have been pre-qualified, whether it's to the recruiter or to the hiring manager, and let's say to the hiring manager, because sometimes the recruiter and the sorcerer are aligned, and the sorcerer is sending them directly to the hiring manager with the knowledge of the recruiter. So let's say it's going right to the hiring manager, and the hiring manager accepts all 10. I'm a member of the clean plate club kind of belief system. So in my family, if you cleared your plate, if you ate everything on your plate, what that effectively meant is you're hungry and you want more, so you haven't had enough. So you had to leave a little bit as an indicator that I'm good. That was my family, and I'm sure other families have similar traditions like that. So what I'm saying is, if the hiring manager cleared their plate, they probably want more, and so that tells me that we may not be submitting, as you said, the right quality or the right quantity. So if I have more like 80 out of 100 or 8 out of 10 or 7 out of 10, that tells me that the hiring manager is full, and they feel comfortable saying these two or these three I'm not going to look at. That's good. I want that. I don't want 100%, right? Because it means we're probably well, it could also mean the hiring manager is accepting everybody and not really looking at them. That's another problem. But it
yeah.
probably means more than likely that the sorcerer is not sending enough people, or it may not really be an indication of 100% quality, is what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, no, I could definitely see that, and vice versa, right? Like if you, if the sorcerer is submitting, a large number of people, but the acceptance rates are low, then that could be another issue that we need to take
Mhm.
a look at. So I think focusing on quality is an important aspect of evaluating a source's effectiveness. Just like I was really happy about um, really more so aligning the sourcing team like as a source of hire,
Mhm.
kind of like as an internal agency, right? Like they're partners to the recruiters, and strategic partners. And one of the other things that's probably and every enterprise is a little bit different, but we also we're and like I said, we're just in the phase of really ramping up this team, but we also have our sourcers that also in the government sector, if you're a government contractor, there's a segment of recruiting, which is that business development, proposal recruiting, trying to go after new work, and so our sources actually support some pre-award activities um, there as well. And you're familiar with Todd Davis, right?
Mhm. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So in his organization, I think he's part of what the executive team where they do like some really top notch like executive search, developing like personas of like strategic hires for the executive C suite, and that's a function that I think we would be able to take on as well. And I just think what's really cool about sourcers and the sourcing team is, to me, they've always been kind of like the SWAT team of recruiting, right? Like they're like the top of the line. They have all the tools, they have lots of knowledge, and really they're real big on research. And
Mhm.
I just think that there's some possibilities that we could impact the organization even further than just filling top of the funnel, but
Right.
finding
Totally.
new ways to provide value. And I think that's like the biggest determination of success in sourcing is like, how many creative ways can you establish that you can bring value to the organization that they don't even know exists, that they haven't even thought of, right? because that's one of the things that I've come across a lot with business leaders is that they really don't necessarily understand exactly what we do in talent acquisition or in sourcing. Like they don't get that. So I'm constantly having to have conversations of educating and really identifying exactly what the value is of our department
Yeah.
and how we impact the organization at an operational level. And it is a little bit easier in the government contractor world than in some other businesses
Why is
because,
that? Is that because everything's tied to like a billing code or something like that?
well, I was going to tell you, like, so at the end of the day, if so, like my organization, we're a staff augmentation
Hmm.
organization. So meaning, we win a contract. Let's just say it's a firm fixed price contract or a T&M time and materials contract. We win that, and essentially we said to the government, okay, our deliverables are going to be, here's the people that we're going to hire to do this work that you need us to do. So if it's firm fixed price, you have to have a certain number of people based on the contract to fill the labor categories in order to be
Available
in
for that.
compliance.
Okay.
Right?
Got it. Yep.
If it's time and material, every single person, every labor category that goes unfilled is either lost revenue or revenue that's actualized. So
Mm.
we can clearly show if we fill positions for the organization, guess what we're doing for the organization? We're helping
Generating
them to
revenue.
generate revenue.
Right.
So it, so in our, so even for sourcing, where maybe in the past that particular organization has had a pattern of utilizing staffing agencies, I can clearly come in with a sourcing team and say, hey, these positions would have cost this amount of money had they gone to staffing agencies. But because we
But
have an
doesn't that go
internal,
back to the hire again? So that's like, the sourcer and the recruiter together getting credit for the same thing. So how is sourcing specifically contributing
well,
to that?
well, sourcers are getting credited as a source of hire,
Got it.
not as they're tied to a higher goal.
So
They're
is it
getting credit.
a percentage of all hires, right? Like of the 100% hires, some percentage of it were sourced by sourcing. Is that the overall like
Ye-
team metric?
Well, that will be, but
Okay.
we haven't gotten there yet. But
Okay.
eventually, we're gonna try to identify like a certain percentage, right? We're gonna look. So, like this first year is pretty important to be able to like fully
At the
map
stage.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
What
to set the
happened, right?
stage, and then
Yeah.
we'll be able to kind of forecast from there. Um,
Yeah, you
what
you
that
have no
percentage should
idea
look like.
what it's going to look like until you actually do it. It's hard to create a measurement without actually having the data. So first you have to get the data, then you can create the measurement. Now, real quick, this can get kind of heady and be a pretty intellectual conversation, and some folks might be tuned out to it. So I just want to clarify,
Mhm.
and by tuned out, I don't mean because they don't have the capacity. What I'm saying is it might be boring. Okay, that's what I'm
Yeah,
trying to
yeah,
say.
yeah. I
It
gotcha.
might be boring to some people. So let me make this a little bit more interesting. There is a very big difference between a measurement and a metric. And I see people making this mistake all the time, especially when they're young in the function, when they're early in the function and they're just starting to be asked, can you tell me what your team's success is? Define success for your team. And they make the mistake of assuming that a measurement is a metric, and
Mhm,
that's not the case. The measurement is the number specifically. Okay,
mhm. Yep.
so my my waist size measures 30 inches. Yeah, it doesn't, but let's pretend it does. Right, my
Yeah.
waist size measures 30 inches. However, that is not a metric. If I'm trying to lose weight and I'm using my waist size as the metric, then the metric isn't 30 inches. The metric is how many inches of change have been made in a defined period of time. So if I say I want to lose some weight, I can say in this year, in a 1 year period, I would like to lose 2 inches. The metric is how many inches per year, not the
Yep.
measurement. And this is a very important point. No matter what, even if you're being measured, it's important to understand that, because the metric itself, and by the way, the reason I'm bringing this up is I often hear people saying the number of contacts found or the number of contacts added to the ATS is a metric. No, it is definitely, most definitely, absolutely not a metric. It is a measure. And it matters because if I every day add 10 people to the ATS, that doesn't tell anything. That just tells me I've been doing the same thing over and over again. So if you want to measure success, then you have to say the increase in contacts added to our ATS over time. Over what period of time, right? So that's important. If you're going to say we are going to measure success based on people being added to the ATS, then you have to say people being added to the ATS per week, per month, per year, compared to what? Compared to last year or compared to a different department, or right? So that is the metric. So just wanted to interject that because it can derail quickly with people saying, well, you have to add this actually is a true story. You have to add 1,000 people to the CRM every month. Okay, well, um, guess what? I did. I added 1,000 people to the CRM. Heck, I added 2,000 people to the CRM. Means absolutely nothing. You know, those
Well, yeah,
2,000 people were like
that's the first thing I was thinking of is okay, well, you do that, but what's the outcome of
garbage.
that action?
Outcome. I love that. Outcome. That is it right there. That is the outcome is what you want,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah, and that's kind of like, I guess the analogy is, beginning with the end in mind, right?
Yep.
Like, what are we trying to accomplish? Well, for me, the sourcing team, what I'm trying to accomplish is a internal, center of excellence of a function that can build, talent pipelines and, lower our aging requisition numbers, and be a significant, source of hires within the organization for the most challenging, most difficult positions to fill. That's the outcome. So for me, I just need to be able to capture enough data in order to set appropriate benchmarks to know that as we go through this process, that we are trending in the right direction to accomplish the outcomes.
That's
So,
right.
um,
Bez pointed out that in his comments. So definitely go back and read that for those of you that are
yeah.
watching online. He pointed that out. And going a step further, also saying that if your leadership is saying that you have to contribute X, make sure that the organization is capable of onboarding X, right? So this happened recently
Mhm.
in an organization where the team as a whole, TA as a whole, was tasked with hiring a particular number of a headcount, right? So you've got to hire X amount of people in this quarter, and what ended up happening is we hit a sort of hit a wall where hiring managers didn't have enough time to interview and onboarding was overwhelmed and everything. So we really should not have tried to meet that goal in retrospect. The thing is we met it, but then we had to pivot and we decided, okay, we've got to slow this down. We can't do this again because it caused a lot of repercussions. In order for us to jam those hires in there, everybody wanted the hires, but the organization itself wasn't ready to onboard. We didn't have enough laptops. We didn't have enough people to, so that is a very good point that sorry, Brez. I don't know why. Bez. Bez Renfro Brez. Yeah, that's your new name, buddy. Brez. Bez is pointing out. So absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Good point.
So I looked at a couple of things. I look at things like the percentage of people who were contacted that replied.
Mhm.
And I'd like to have some sort of number. So I start with taking a look at, okay, how many people have we contacted that we replied? And if that's, let's say, 20%, then what I'd like to do is I'd like to increase that by 5%. So start out with, in general, 20% of the people we contact reply. Okay, so improvement this year will be to increase that number to 25%. That's your metric. Make sense?
Yep, absolutely.
Then, of those replied, percentage that were screened, of
Mhm.
those screened, percentage that were submitted. These
Submitted.
are smaller, these are smaller steps. Now, these are, by the way, these are the things that I would put in a dashboard. They are not the things I would put in a scorecard. In the dashboard, percent contacted who replied, percent replied who were screened, percent screened who got submitted, percent submitted who got accepted, right? That's the dashboard. You can think of it as a funnel or whatever.
Yeah.
But the scorecard doesn't show any of that, because the scorecard is going to show the one that is the big measure. It's what I was asking about before, which is percentage of people submitted that got accepted, because that tells the hiring managers about our quality and our process.
Hmm.
And then the second part, or the second dimension, is that percentage that were moved forward. So percentage that got accepted, as in I like this candidate, I like to talk to them. And then the second part of that is percentage that moved forward past that point.
Yeah.
So, 7 out of 10, the hiring manager said yes. And so that's seven. Out of those seven, two of them like were no's. And so 2 out of 5 got no's, or the other way around, 3 out of 5. Sorry, I said seven. 5 out of 7 move forward. That's the other one. And then that's about it. So to me, sourcing, uh, respectfully, I don't know what you're doing, but to me, sourcing kind of ends there. When the
Hmm.
hiring manager moves the candidate forward, maybe that's a test, an assessment, an online, a phone screen, whatever
Interview.
that is.
Yep. Hmm.
My team in sourcing doesn't really have a whole lot of recourse to impact that anymore.
Exactly.
You could argue that we can increase the quality, um, because if some people aren't passing the test or whatever, but there comes a matter of culture, subjectivity, compensation. you
Yep.
know I'm sure that in your space you probably have some very specific compensation guidelines related to the cost or profitability of the project.
Of the contract. Yeah, for sure.
God bless you for having the ability to do that. Some of us essentially have to go to our teams and go, listen, nobody that's doing this job right now is getting paid that low. And have the team say, well, we need to do a salary comp. Yeah, I'm sorry. To all the analysts out there, of which I count myself one, these salary comps are horribly out of date.
Yep.
They're out of date right now.
Yep.
Everybody that used to be making $350,000 after graduating from college and having 1 year of experience is probably looking for a job right now. Or maybe not, and maybe they're lucky. But those salaries of skyrocketing proportions are very quickly being normalized right now. So if you have a salary analysis or a salary comparison right now, it's probably from December of last year, last quarter, because it hasn't even been a full quarter in this year yet. Not yet, January, February. Yeah, almost in a week, right? So even something like that,
Yeah.
I really appreciate that you have the ability to do that, but it's just not
Well, and
realistic.
sometimes it is nice when it's priced correctly. So,
Right. Yep.
because there's different variations of contracts, and and so that it's actually important for operations to bring in recruiting, and that's actually for business development purposes, so we can provide input as like, hey, I here because they're going to bring us in from they're basing their proposal around solutioning and
Oh,
cost,
right.
right?
Oh, wow. So what
Yeah.
happens? I'm just going to make something up. What happens if you win a contract that your company has to provide,
Hmm.
I don't know, 10 million servers or something like that. And in order to do that, you need to have 100 network engineers to build out this 10 million server. I'm totally making this up, by the way, but like they need to have 100 engineers. Project starts and you only have 80.
Well, depending on the contract, it could be fine. Like if you're firm fixed price and you're meeting the threshold
Oh,
of,
okay. You
you
get a
know,
time to like.
you're fine. And
Okay.
some contracts, there is a there's a transition period, so you can get up to speed.
Right.
So there's all different variables about that. But what really is like a bad thing is if a contract is won, they didn't include recruiting, and
Oh.
they underbid the contract.
Oh.
So now you've promised the government that you can fill this contract with these individuals at a rate that you can't find anyone at, because that's not what the market is bearing.
I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, so when
Oof.
that happens, that
Ruthless.
causes a whole different set of problems.
Oy.
So it is, I've been doing this for a while, so it's really important. So that's one of the reasons why we are involved in kind of like the, we would call it business development or
Oh, that's
proposal
really good.
recruiting.
Wouldn't that
to
be
help
awesome if
shape
that
that.
was the same case everywhere? So,
Well,
the
yeah,
leadership
yeah.
team went to the sourcing leader and said, "Hey, sourcing leader, we would like to plan next year's headcount, and we would like to get some assistance from you in figuring out what the market, availability is."
But
Right?
wouldn't that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've been
like
talking about that for a while now.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So get this. I probably shared this story before, but so sorry if it's repetitive. But there was an occasion at a company that I was working with, not recently, but some time ago, where the um, VPGM, which is essentially the president for all intents and purposes of this division, had a during a meeting with other leaders, and I was in that meeting, had a question for the other their peers that was essentially, we would like to we would like to close this facility because it isn't producing the number of widgets that we need,
Mhm,
and we would like to outsource the obtainment of those widgets rather than making them ourselves. We'd like to just buy them.
mhm.
Does anybody have any ideas? And I was like really nervous, but I spoke up because these are all VPGMs, and I'm just a sourcing leader, right? But
Yeah.
I'm like, I have some data. I said I have some data that might help. I said, what if we can identify the reason why the facility isn't producing? Is it one of staff? Is it one of leadership? Could we potentially identify competitors in the area that could either A, be acquired to augment the production, or B, recruited to come and lead this facility to improve production if that's possible? So I suggested, it was a lot briefer than this, but they asked questions and we got to, um, long story short, right? I suggested, okay, at the end of the brief discussion, I said, what about this? What if we can figure out what other facilities do the same thing nearby and what they produce, right? So we can see, first of all, are there other facilities that can do better? And what talent is available in that general market locally? Because we know we didn't want to go do a nationwide search and everything. And they said, okay, we'll hold off on making that decision until you can come back and do that report. Wow. Okay,
Mm,
great. So now it's like on me, right? So I go out and I do the research. I come back and I send an email and I say to everybody, all right, this is what I found. There are three other organizations that have similar facilities for widget manufacturing of similar footprint, size, etc. There are several others that do similar things that don't make the same thing, but that have leaders that are, facility leaders that could easily um, come over and, be brought in to like turn things around. And then these are the situations. And so based on that email, the VPGM called the meeting and said, we are going to fund this facility for 3 more years.
mm.
Wow, dude.
Yeah,
That was
that's
huge.
remarkable. Yeah,
Yeah, that was huge. And I was like so happy for sourcing at that moment because it really proves the value of competitive intelligence.
yeah.
um, Ultimately, they ended up going with option B, which is they basically, instead of buying another one, they hired on someone that would oversee the facility locally. What was happening was one person was running three of these widget making things, and there wasn't enough time on the ground to really, run things, to improve things. So they hired someone to come in and be the local boss of the widget making, and it did turn things around.
Awesome.
And all I can tell you is that the result of that is in your wallet right now.
Nice. Yeah,
Almost everybody listening to this has a item in their wallet that was made by this facility. So, by the way, I am not. This is not me bragging. This is me telling the importance of having information at your fingertips. So, if you have the opportunity, speak up,
yeah,
because at the very least, my fundamental belief is that our value, yours, mine, everybody that is leading not just a sourcing team but also a TA team,
mhm,
our number one value, our number one contribution is decision support. We
yeah,
are not really the decision makers. You may be the VP of TA and you may make decisions about your team. Obviously, I make decisions about my team all the time. But when it comes to business strategy, that's above. That's the CEO, maybe the board, not usually, usually the CEO and the executive team are the ones that are setting the strategy. I'm tasked with executing it. But if we are able to provide leadership with a better decision, that
Yeah.
made a difference. So, Junius, if your sourcer produced a candidate that made it all the way to interview but didn't get hired, however, they were the second candidate, and the first candidate who did get hired was the only candidate, I'm pretty sure that hiring manager would not have hired that candidate because they would have felt like they don't have a choice, right?
Yeah.
If I only
Yeah.
have one candidate, unless it's literally a match made in heaven and absolutely perfect for every measure, I'm probably not going to just slam dunk it. I'm probably going to say, I need to compare this, right? So if you provided the alternative and they went with the first choice anyway, your job has been done. They didn't get hired, but that manager is now confident in having interviewed two very equivalent candidates and hired the right one because of your contribution. So even if you don't assist in recruiting, if you don't assist to the hire, we still contributed. And that's just one aspect. What about the other aspect of, headcount planning and things like that? There was a
Oh
lot
yeah.
about that in the call yesterday,
Yep.
you know?
Well,
So,
headcount planning. We're actually, and I think it doesn't necessarily fall underneath um, TA per se, but I think any great organization should also have a pretty good plan, especially in the contracting world, of how they can shift their employees around from expiring contract to other,
oh,
so talent management,
redeployment or,
redeployment. Yeah. So we're
yeah,
currently going through a process as an organization focused on that, because that's just such a waste, right? Like, talk about a waste of resources. Like, you spend all that money bringing people into the organization, and a particular contract ends. You're like, okay, thanks, right? And then, another opportunity
goodbye,
comes
thanks for all
up.
the fish.
Uh, come, would you be interested in coming back? Instead, like, the longer term solution is, okay, let's identify a strategy, internally, that when we have, like, expiring contracts, what are
Mhm.
what are the kind of contracts we should be going for? First of all,
Yeah,
like feeder
like some
contracts,
system. Yeah, some system that
intermediate
determines
contracts.
like,
Yeah,
yeah, if maybe there's another contract, this one's ending, but another one's starting, and you could just
exactly.
go. Boop. But you wouldn't
Redeploy.
you need to know like what kind of things would you need to know? You need to know what the skill set is.
Well, and that's part of forecasting, right? That's part of
No, I'm
that.
sorry. I mean for the team that you're deployed. Like
Yes,
you know what
yes.
that skill set is, but you don't know what this skill set. Well,
Well,
you need to know both, basically. Yeah.
exactly, right? You need to, so, like, and that's one of the benefits sometimes of being in the government contracting realm, is that you really can kind of shape your workforce around the kind of work you go after. But I think the same principles would apply to any line of business, depending upon what your lane is. You can kind of build in those escalation, career tracks within your organization, so you have kind of like a feeder system to, and I know it sounds kind of like weird, like, the terminology I'm using, but you just want the capability of being able to say, okay, like, for instance, I'll give you an example. We have these contracts where they're like secret level. But what if
Mhm.
what if we went after some contracts that are not secret level, because we know that the government historically has had a hard time of processing clearances, and most of the contracts in the cleared world, you have to have people who already have that skill set. What the problem is that there's supply and demand issues. There's more cleared work than there are cleared personnel. You have individuals that are retiring.
Okay.
So what
So
if
what if
you
you could compartmentalize the clearance levels so that whatever the work is that requires clearance is done by one individual and the rest of the world the work is done by non-cleared individuals because those tasks don't have access to the compartmentalized cleared information.
well, it's all based on the contract, right? So
Oh, the
sometimes,
whole
so
contract. Okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So sometimes you have that flexibility and sometimes you don't.
It's not the work
Um,
necessarily. Okay, gotcha.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. But what I was going to get to is, like, well, a strategic initiative would be, well, how about we as an organization go after some non-cleared work? and then bring in people, and then get them, they're billable, so they're contributing to the
And they wouldn't be
organization.
let go until we what
And
would
then what we could do is we can, as people perform and they're top performers,
yeah.
we could start putting people in for sponsorship for clearances. So when a
Ooh.
vacancy comes available on a cleared contract, and we have some people who have been cleared for a clearance, we can then move them
Yeah.
as a career track into that
It's talent
clear.
development, bro. That's
Yeah,
talent
exactly.
development. I mean, it's not training because they're not. They have the skill. They just don't have the one, checkbox. But you're still developing them into that. That is brilliant. I love that. That's like pre-sourcing, right? Like I'm
Yeah,
thinking
right.
Minority Report. What's
Yeah,
his name?
yeah,
Tom Cruise is like pre-crime. Like this person's
yeah.
gonna commit. Yeah, the opposite of that, right? This person's gonna become cleared. So let's let's get him
Exactly
now,
right.
and then
Yeah.
he's here. I love that. I
Yeah,
love
so
that. What about?
that could
Oh yeah,
that
sorry. Go ahead.
no, I was gonna say, I mean, you could even, like, if you wanted to get into the weeds on it, you can even say, okay, well, we want to make that part of our uh, you know, DE&I initiatives. We want to make that
Hmm.
part of our military veteran outreach initiatives, our early career. I mean, there's so many ways that you could uh, implement a strategy like that that could impact the organization at scale in a very big way. And you would be like, and then to have the ability to go back and look at, okay, what are the impacts of having this kind of strategy built into the organization, right? Like, as far as turnover, as far as meeting some of our social initiatives. Like, I mean, there would be so many different things that you could
Hmm.
be able to speak to that would bring value to the organization, and that's one of the things I think is so important as a leader, or even when I was a contributor, is I was always thinking, and I'm still constantly always thinking, how can I bring value to the organization? Because I truly feel that talent acquisition and sourcing, they are revenue generators for companies. They are not cost centers. Now, I know they might be labeled as a cost center, but I think if you implement the right strategies that always tie to the outcomes that we're looking for, that align with the business goals of the organization, it changes that paradigm. What were you going to say, Shally? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
What you're saying, I'm like deep thinking all this. What you're saying sounds to me like a measure that's been established by the ISO that is a legit measure called impact of hire, right? So it's not necessarily source of hire because whether it's sourcing or you made a comment, and I know it was just a comment as you were processing your thoughts that TA or sourcing. I don't think that's an or. I think TA includes sourcing, but I know that's
Yes.
what you meant.
Yeah.
So TA in general, that is contributing, people into the workflow, shouldn't be measured just on the hire because meeting the goals, like one of the classic measurements is how many people we hired. But that again, going back to my beginning, how many people we hired is just a measurement. It is not a metric because if you hired 1,000 people but you needed 2,000, you failed, bro. You're done. You know, so hiring 1,000 doesn't mean anything. But the measurement is how many people do you hire. The metric is percentage of positions filled or fill rate or staffing rate. People call it different things. I get that. But that is really only about recruiting and hiring. It doesn't really include onboarding. It doesn't include some other parts of the process. That's why the ISO has this impact of hire that dis, disregarding or without regard to the source of hire, the people that are hired have a certain contribution. And it's kind of related to quality of hire, but not the same because quality of hire is often um, measured in the long-term impact. So um, our quality of hire improves if the people that we hire stay here longer, right? 30-day, 90-day drop off, promotions in 1 year, promotions. These are quality of hire measurements, but this is impact of hire. So think of it as I, I've used this example before, so I'm gonna try and see if I can. Um, I can't remember the name of the dude, but the dude that invented the iPhone. Okay,
Mm.
literally like invented the legit. There's somebody who did this at Apple. They actually invented the iPhone. I'm sure that they were standing on the shoulders of giants. I'm sure they give credit where credit was due, and they talked about Windows and UI and even the Palm devices or the BlackBerry, whatever. But at some point, this dude made the iPhone, and that iPhone, heck, that changed the world. But forget about the world. Let's talk about Apple. That made Apple some money right there.
Mhm.
That's impact of hire. But in the world of TA, that's one hire.
No, it's not just one hire
We
though.
just hired one person.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But
Tick,
yeah, to your point, yeah,
done.
absolutely.
But the impact was huge,
Yep.
right? Now, the opposite of that, okay, make a hire and that person has a very negative impact on the organization and tanks the company, right? So I think impact of hire, the ISO established it as a recommended measurement and metric, but I don't think I see it very often. Um,
Mm.
it might be just kind of challenging to measure
Yeah.
because it's not about revenue necessarily. I mean, it can be, right?
Oh yeah.
It's somebody just posted here. Oh, there's yeah. I saw it in the corner of my eye. And I was like, yeah, income generators, right? That obviously makes sense. If you recruit salespeople, you know that they're generating revenue.
Yep.
But there is a way, I think, and maybe have you thought? Do you have this where you can look at the impact of hire, even if the person is not tied to revenue, right? Or revenue lost, because there's people who make money, and then there's people who save money. In procurement, they're similar to sales. Procurement officers are often measured on how much money they save the organization
Hmm.
and how much money they save more than last year, and they're even bonused like a salesperson is for commission. They're bonus for commission on how much they save. So making money and saving money are just two sides of the same coin. There are people that don't have anything to do with money, but they still save the company. Like for example, in your business, are they saving lives? I'm not, I don't know exactly what it is, but like, are these people actually saving lives, protecting our country
Yep.
from evil, protecting our world from evil? So that is a significant impact, I think, that, the sorcerer who found the candidate that created the defense system that protected us from some kind of nefarious evil attack, that's a significant impact. It doesn't necessarily tie back to revenue.
Yeah, but you bring up a good point though, right? Like, which is like really um doing the work to identify the impacts of talent acquisition to the enterprise at large, and doing a good
Mhm.
job of being able
Oh,
to
in general, I see
communicate.
what you mean. Okay,
Yeah,
right.
to
Not that
communicate.
higher, but like I gotcha. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, to communicate, and that's something that you hear quite a bit. Like, we've all been on the forums and seen people say, we don't have a seat at the table, or when we do have a seat, that kind of stuff. And
I had a seat at the table, but right as I was sitting down, somebody pulled it out from under me and I fell.
yeah, yeah. But no, I think that you had a great illustration there, and certainly that's actually one of the things that's so kind of cool about working in the government cleared sector is like we have a program that we work directly. We're at the Pentagon and we're doing some pretty impactful stuff to protect our networks across whether it's CONUS or OCONUS, the enterprise, and we're doing some stuff that it's not just dollars and cents. We're
Mhm.
impacting not just our organization, but we're
Saving
impacting
lives and yeah,
the American citizens,
yeah.
right? Um, but if you don't tell that story, or if you don't do the research to figure out, go down that rabbit hole a little bit to be able to tie it back to the mission of the organization, and when you have the opportunity to brief on these things, if you
Mm.
don't say these things, then
They don't connect the
it's
dots.
your business leaders, they don't connect the dots because this is not what they do day in
It's
day
it's
out.
not visible to them. Yeah, it's
It, it,
it's they hired somebody to take care of this. So
exactly.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it really is incumbent upon the leaders to communicate and share that story, right? No matter what line of business it is. So that way they can understand the value. Now, again, I've been pretty fortunate. I've had some forward thinking, leaders that I've been able to work with who, they looked at talent acquisition, in a very positive way. But I'm not naive and know that there are instances across, the American landscape where that's not always the philosophy that's held dearest to all C-suite leaders, right? So, but I do think that that is an area that I've always tried to figure out is okay, what's the mission of the organization,
Yeah.
and how can we tie operations to mirror that and be able to communicate that value?
Yeah, that's huge. You know what that makes me think of, and this might be something I can do some research on, bring somebody on the show. Um, it would make sense to me that people in the healthcare, and
Oh
I don't
yeah.
just mean hospitals, could be cancer research and stuff like that,
Hmm.
must have this figured out, or someone because that everybody knows a hospital's mission is to save lives. I mean, that's literally
Yeah.
what their job is, and to make people's lives better through healing. Um,
Hmm.
so I'm gonna look into that. But the as you were talking about that, the other thing that I thought of as well was one step below the mission is the overarching strategy of the organization. And so, for example, when I talk about metrics and measurement, and talking to the C-suite, I use this analogy that um, let's say the leader says our mission this year is to penetrate a new market. Let's say we're a U.S. based company. This year's strategy is to enter China and establish our business in China, for example, right?
Hmm.
So TA can tie their outcomes to that. I don't know. That's not a mission. That's more like a strategy, right? Um,
Yeah, but you were
it-
talking about underneath that, right? Like,
yeah, that's
yeah.
yeah. So the mission is there, but this is like, okay, this year we're going to do this. So TA can say, well, regarding the establishing ourselves in China, here's what we've contributed, and so that's like a very direct way of being that Bez's favorite word today, trusted advisor,
Yeah.
because you can then contribute to that goal of establishing business in China through a very direct way, which
Yeah,
is
and it's part of the strategic plan.
exactly, we're
It's
hiring X
yep.
amount of, we have 100 openings in China, we're hiring for those openings, and that's not just vacancy rate. That's vacancy rate in China specifically to our mission. So
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, I wanted to ask you, Shally, just because since I have you all to myself here, what is your favorite? Like, I shouldn't say favorite, but what's kind of like the new thing that you've been like you really utilizing a lot? Like, what's like the hot thing that you are just enamored with as far as like sourcing, whether it's technology, whether it's a
mhm.
tool, or like what's something that you're like engrossed in right now?
Can it be two things?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Um, I In the past, I had looked at Gem as a CRM and had found it to be very lacking in some areas, and so I dismissed it. I looked at it very seriously at my previous job, and it had one gap that was just I couldn't overcome. Unfortunately, based on that workflow that I established for that organization. So again, I overlooked it. This year, I looked at it again, and they had overcome that gap, and they have made a lot of other changes. They've made a lot of improvements in other areas as well. So I want to say I'm really impressed, and I've become an advocate of a Gem because they have overcome some of these things in the past that I look at it every time, and it just wasn't there yet, but now it is. So I'm a fan of Gem for a number of reasons that include their ability to enhance existing systems. For example, we use Greenhouse, and Greenhouse has some very well documented gaps that they themselves say, hey, we are good at this. This is an area where we have an API, and we don't do that, right? So Gem has found a niche in that they connect very well with Greenhouse and enhance it. They connect very well with Seek Out and enhance it. So that's one. For that reason, for its ecosystem compatibility abilities alone, and then there's all the other things that it does. But that was stopping me before. The other one is ChatGPT, but not for the reasons that you would think. Um, I'm finding ChatGPT as a very succinct and quick way of summarizing information.
Hmm.
Even when I'm looking at a page, I have to read a lot, and I often miss things, and I have to go back and read it again, and I don't have time. I don't have focus for that. So it's helpful in using its summarization capabilities to give me an advanced, summary. When I teach speed reading, what I teach is read the first sentence of every paragraph when you pass the speed reading test. Then try to answer the question that's asked by the headline. And if you can't, then read the last question of each paragraph. And if you still can't, then you have to go in and read the whole thing. I think I don't think that's that GPT works, but it's doing something like that. So it's actually doing the speed reading for me. I'm not relying on it. If I want the details, I go back to the original article, but I am finding that it is that first speed reading pass. In another area that it works really well is in answering questions very quickly. It doesn't always get them right, and it doesn't
Yeah.
always have an answer. But my mother is hospitalized in Florida, and I know this has nothing to do with work, but it's an example. And normally I would never have gone to anywhere for this. I would have just done my own research. But I was like, I wonder what ChatGPT has to say about it. And I went there and I said, can you provide me a list of all the advanced nursing facilities? They're called different things in different states. All the nursing facilities in Broward County. And ChatGPT said, nah, no, I can't do that because it's not, I should have known this. They don't have current information for 2021. But it said, here's 3 websites that do.
Hmm.
And I know I could have gone to Google, but I guarantee you, in fact, I probably should do that now. If I had gone to Google for that, I probably would have gotten a bunch of ads and some semi ads and some SEO things, and probably would ended up with some places that are trying to sell you services to find facilities.
Yeah.
Whereas this pointed me to like literally 3 government websites that have directories of,
Oh,
and I was
that's
like,
awesome.
oh
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, short time saving.
Yeah,
That's it.
that's one of the things that I've kind of really has been a revelation to me too, is just thinking through all of the ways that it could help us to become more efficient in what we do. So that way we have more time to continue to drive value adds. Like I've seen, I think you mentioned yesterday during your presentation about how you used it to enhance. I think you said the slides, right? That you
I did,
used.
yeah. They didn't write the slides for me, but it enhanced them. I gave it sometimes. I gave it um, things like, how would you put this in a PowerPoint slide? And then it was like, here's a bullet point, or here's a header, or things like that. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, so but that's what I'm saying. Like those are like, I mean, it's like anything. Like I tell people all the time, like a tool is only as good as the user that's implementing the tool, right? But I think having a good grasp of how you would be able to really leverage something like this, it could really be a differentiator, I think.
yeah.
Still, like, I'm not one to just kind of go into like the hype about like, oh, this, I don't really worry about like AI taking our jobs or anything like that. I just think that's a little far fetched. But I do think that there's so much that we can utilize this kind of technology, and I'm excited to see how this continues to expand into the future,
Me
because
too.
like
Yeah.
just some of the things that people have already explored doing, and this is a free tool. So who knows how long it's free, but we'll see, I guess.
I'm excited about that. I have kept you for an hour now, and I know that you probably have real work to do. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd like to just kind of wrap things up, but I want to make sure that I'm consistent about this. I like to end our talks, as you probably know, by dropping a little bit of wisdom on our listeners and viewers to think about over the weekend. So is there something, what words of wisdom or a question or something you want to leave, an idea you want to leave people with as you're closing today, that you want them to, I don't know, think about?
Yeah, I would just say continue to just invest in yourself and understanding that in talent acquisition we have a significant impact on organizations, and as you continue to invest in yourself by learning as much as you can learn about the profession, increasing your capability and your knowledge, It's going to empower you to feel comfortable to really become that business partner that hiring managers need, that they don't even know that they need, right? Or even business leaders need, right? Because Shelley, you made a great point, which is, you talked about how, we're there to help the organization make better decisions.
Yeah.
And this happens all the time on the front lines in talent acquisition. And you'll see it a lot more with senior recruiters or senior sourcers who have become very confident in their voice, where they're advising. They're not order taking. Like they are driving the engine that's helping their business partners get to the outcomes they're looking for. So I would just say those that are out there listening today, uh, try to really take that approach, right? Like, do what you need to do in order to continue to invest in yourself to get to that level. But once you feel confident in what you bring to the table, definitely drive that value by partnering and providing advice, and providing alternatives and solutions to even problems they haven't even thought of yet. Because when that happens, they're
Right.
like, wow, they're
Right.
taken aback and they're appreciative.
Value add, big time.
Yep.
I love it. That's a really good way to close. Thank you, my friend. You are
No, thank you.
beautiful, and this is we gotta have you guys back on here at some point. So, I know we're definitely over time. Apologize for keeping everybody a little bit on.
Sorry.
Have a great weekend and be kind to each other.